Hey guys, I'm going to read you a Flat Stanley book today, but first, let me introduce you to somebody. Meet Flat Mrs. Amick. I'm going to send you a file and you can print your own Flat Mrs. Amick. Or if you don't have a printer, then you can just draw one on paper at your own house. Then we can have adventures together. You can share pictures and write a description, or have your parents help you write a description of our adventures together and post them on Flat Mrs. Amick, which is on Facebook. She has her own Facebook page, or on Instagram, just tag at Flat Mrs. Amick, all one word. Okay, so I'll send you one of those, and I hope we get to have some really cool adventures together. I'll be looking forward to seeing your pictures. All right, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. If you have any questions, just message me, okay? All right, so we are going to read Flat Stanley and the Firehouse today. Here's the title page. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since a bulletin board fell on him. Stanley's family found it handy having a flat boy at home, and Stanley didn't mind helping out. Stanley held his tools for his father while Mr. Lambchop repaired the car. Stanley helped Arthur practice his backflips. Stanley gave Mrs. Lambchop a perfect place to roll out pie crusts, except when he felt ticklish. Stanley made a good stencil, too. Hold still, said Arthur. Stanley held his breath as Arthur traced him carefully. Children all over the city were entering a poster contest for Fire Safety Month. I hope we win the trip to the firehouse, said Arthur. Me too, said Stanley. I have always wanted to slide down the pole. The next Monday, a letter arrived. Hey, guess what? Shouted Arthur. Hay is for horses, Mrs. Lambchop said. Try to remember that, dear. Sorry, said Arthur. Guess what? Our poster won the contest. We're going to the firehouse on Saturday. Mrs. Lambchop clapped. I knew you boys had my talent for art, she said proudly. Stanley and Arthur practiced fire drills all week long. Arthur crawled around the house on his hands and knees. Stanley did the stop, drop, and roll, mostly roll. At last Saturday came. The Lambchops drove to the firehouse. Welcome, bellowed Chief Abbott. A puppy bounced at his feet. Arf, 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 arf. Don't mind Spark, said the chief. He's still in training. Chief Abbott led the Lambchops through the firehouse kitchen. We firefighters cook up some tasty meals, he said. Mr. Lambchop got out his camera. He took a picture of the pot of chili. Everyone went on to the bunk room. Very nice, said Mrs. Lambchop. Can I see the trucks? Said Arthur. Of course, said Chief Abbott. He led everyone down to the garage. Stanley was disappointed. He had wanted to get there by pole. Boots and pants lay on the floor. Oh my, said Mrs. Lambchop. I could tidy up if you'd like. Chief Abbott laughed. We leave these out here so we can jump into them in an emergency, he said. Neat, said Stanley. Chief Abbott pointed to the truck ladder. Climb on up if you'd like. Wow, said Arthur. The boys scrambled onto the truck. Spark was right behind them. Suddenly, the alarm bell rang. Chief, code 9 on Oak Street, called a firefighter. The chief turned to the Lambchops. How would you folks like to come along on a rescue? A rescue? Will it be safe? Asked Mr. Lambchop. You bet, said Chief Abbott. Code 9 means a cat up a tree. Probably Furball again. Mr. Lambchop looked at his wife. She gave a little nod. Yes! Yelled Stanley and Arthur. "Stanley, turn on the siren!" "Arthur, hit the lights!" shouted Chief Abbott. "My goodness, is that necessary?" asked Mrs. Lambchop. "No," said Chief Abbott, "it's just more fun this way." The truck raced out of the station. Soon it pulled up to a tall tree. A tiny cat shivered at the top. "She's pretty high up this time," said Chief Abbott. Spark panted at the chief's feet. "All right, let's get her down." 2 firefighters raised the ladder. The Lambchops moved out of the way. Chief Abbott climbed up until Furball was just a few feet away. "Good kitty," he said, stretching out his hands. "Come here, Furball." You see the kitty up in the tree? Spark started to bark. "Arf, arf, arf." For a second, Furball froze. Then she jumped the other way. "Furball!" cried Chief Abbott. He was too late. Furball was heading for the ground. The Lambchops looked up. Their mouths were open in surprise. All at once, Stanley threw himself on the grass. "Grab my hands," he told his mother. Mrs. Lambchop grabbed his hands. "Grab my feet," he told Arthur. But Arthur didn't move. "Hey!" shouted Mrs. Lambchop at the top of her lungs. "Grab his feet!" Arthur blinked. He grabbed Stanley's feet. "Stretch!" cried Stanley. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stretched Stanley between them. They were not a second too soon. Boing! Meow! Furball bounced on Stanley's belly, then landed safely on the ground. The firefighters started clapping. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stood Stanley back up. Arthur looked at his mother. "Hay is for horses," he said. "Remember?" Mrs. Lambchop grinned. "Good work, Lambchops," said Chief Abbott, racing over. "How can we ever thank you?" "Well," said Stanley, "there is one thing." What do you think Stanley's going to say? How can they thank him? Whee! They asked to ride down the pole, didn't they? Good. I hope you liked that book. And I hope you guys will make your own Flat Mrs. Amick. You can either, like I said, you can print her on a printer at home, or you can draw her and share your adventures. We're going to use this as a fun way to practice our writing skills and our creativity. So you can post those pictures of what she does or what you do with her on the Facebook page, Flat Mrs. Amick, or on Instagram, tag at Flat Mrs. Amick, all one word. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. I know how creative you are, and I hope you guys are doing great.